Okay, so for those who doesn't know Andres, is an Argentinian filmmaker and writer. Is one of the most significant documentary directors in Latin America, and he directed 12 feature films, between them 327 cuadernos, Montoneros, La Televisión y Yo, and of course Private Fiction, several TV documentaries, video arts, installations, and performance. He's also now launching his new book, Cuadernos, that I'm eager to read. I'm waiting for a friend from Argentina to bring me the book. He's the founder of the Buenos Aires Film Festival, and he also directed the film festival, also directed the Princeton Documentary Film Festival in Princeton University. And currently he's the director of a beautiful program in University of Tella in Buenos Aires, that I did it myself in 2019, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. I highly recommend that program to any filmmaker that wants to learn more.
Bueno, gracias.
De nada. Totalmente merecido.
Make me blush.
So you're talking from Buenos Aires, right?
Yes, it's 9 p.m. in Buenos Aires. It's autumn. The chill is starting to creep in. It's my favorite season. If only we could go out. Because we are under strict lockdown again. We have a very bad COVID situation. So
yeah, but you're used to it by now, right?
Well, no, you never get used to it.
Yeah. So I would love to start this conversation asking you about the beginning of how you start with all this project, being an autobiographical film. I think that it's super difficult to find the first point to start, because personal lives are so, they have so many things and so many connections, and it's like it's really difficult to find the story. So
well, you know, Chuang Tzu was either mythical or real Chinese philosopher. Was also a painter, was quite a good draftsman, and he was called upon by the emperor to draw a crab for the emperor. Chuang Tzu said, yes, but I need a house to live in with 10 servants for 5 years. The emperor, knowing of Chuang Tzu's reputation as a draftsman, said, yes, of course. 5 years later, Chuang Tzu came back, rather the emperor came back and said, I'd like to see the drawing of the crab. Chuang Tzu says, I'm afraid I have not finished it yet. I need 5 more years. The emperor said, okay. 5 years later, the emperor returned, rather impatient by now, and said, Chuang Tzu, I demand my crab now. And Chuang Tzu picked up a brush and a few swift strokes did the most perfect crab ever seen in China. That's the story. The question is, how long did it take Chuang Tzu to paint that crab? And I think that's my very indirect answer to your question. I mean, a personal film, when does it start? Really, it is hard. You could say, as often is the case, just by chance, you know. Actually, it starts, to be honest, by a coincidence. Death of my father, which happened about 4 years ago. And I was at the time thinking, for some reason, I wanted to do something with photographs. I actually wanted to find photographs in the street. That was something I had in my mind, and suddenly I did. One day, just a few days after the death of my father, I came upon two huge garbage bags that were strewn on the pavement near my house in Buenos Aires. I was walking the dog with my daughter, and I said, I can't believe it. So we started kind of picking them up, and they were all quite a load of old photographs, very old, some of them like from the 1940s or 30s. And they were all torn up, or most of them were torn up. And there were also a lot of letters that were also torn up. And we picked them up, and we came back home, and we started a kind of game with my daughter as to try to piece, the broken pieces of photographs together. And somehow I said, this is a film, and it somehow encapsulated what I felt about my dad and my parents, and I think that was really the beginning.
Okay. And it's interesting because this film, it could be the last of the family trilogy that started with La Televisión Show in 2003, and then Fotografías in 2007. How now, after doing the three of them, how do you connect them? Do you see the threads connecting these three films?
Well, I suppose. I mean, it wasn't a deliberate trilogy in that, when I first made the initial film, which is La Televisión y Yo, Television and I, it's really about my father and about his relationship with his own father, conflicted relationship. I was actually making a film about the origins of television in Argentina, and I discovered the role of a impresario who was a Jewish immigrant who actually came to Argentina just about the same time that my own grandfather did, and he was a radio entrepreneur who had a very important radio station in the 1940s, and then he went through Peronism, the rule of Perón and Evita Perón, and all of the time I was thinking about and researching and making interviews with people around the subject of this man called Jaime Jankelevich. I was thinking of my grandfather. There was a very similar story, a very kind of poor Italian immigrant who made good, in the sense that he made a company that manufactured lots of things, and it became very symbolic in Argentina. And then, just like Jankelevich, he sort of lost not everything, but the company went under. And somehow both these stories were symbolic of Argentina. But I felt I was just telling one side of the story, and I should tell the part that was in my mind, all the associations. So I decided to talk with my father about his own father. And ultimately, that was the emotional core of the film. Then that film, curiously enough, was motivated actually by the death of my mother, Kamala, who was not in the film, but her death was behind the fact that I said, now I have to film my father before he dies, which took a while. And then I thought, well, now it's turned for my mother. 10 years later, or no, not 10, 5 or 6 years later, I made this second film called Photographs, which was basically about my search for her origins in India, and I actually basically met my family, my mother's side of the family. And now, in a way, death has united them, and this film cropped up, which I never intended to make. But in a way, the seed was planted by my father, who, when my mother died, he handed over this. I have it here, just for this whole bunch of letters in this folder that were the letters they wrote each other when they were young. And when he did this, and my mother's death was very recent, I kind of opened it and was really unable to go on very far. But once my father died, I remembered that. So I picked up, the folder and tried to read it. And that's where the film really took form.
You can say that that moment when you start reading the letters is when you realize that you needed to do this film.
Um, I don't know how to answer that. I think that was when I realized there was really a story there, not just these anonymous photographs. So you could say that. At the same time, as soon as I started writing, I said, what am I doing? Because it seems silly, because some people sometimes think, writing about the family is like the easy way out, because it's just there. You don't have to do any research. Like now I've been researching a film that I'm currently producing for 4 or 5 months, and it's, a lot of hard work, but it's so much easier than reading the letters in that folder that have been laying here for years on my desk.
Yeah, so feel free to write any questions. I'm going to open the mic in a while for you to, if any other participant wants to ask questions. So I can see that the film has this magic going on all over it. The spirit is. This start to happen when you start editing, or it was something that you were thinking about before?
Sorry, what
Mhm.
was I sorry, I missed the first part.
So I think that the movie is always making the connection between the other world, the death world, and the
Okay.
presence.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of connections there, like between the future, Lola,
Hmm.
the past, all your family, you doing the film right now, and in the first sequence, for example, you and Lola saw a photo of a man that has like a lot of radios behind him,
Hmm.
and you think, oh, maybe he's trying to connect with the spirit world, and that's like what you're trying to do with the film. So
Yes.
I would love you to tell us more about that
Hmm.
connections.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, as I said, the whole thing began with my father's death. And when I found these photographs on the street with my daughter Lola, in a way, it became something that we were doing together. And it was connected to that death, that loss. And I mean, it made you wonder, who were these people that ended up, that photos torn and their letters abandoned among the garbage in the street. How does that come about? Um, it's like a painful image of forgetfulness, maybe inevitable. forgetfulness. And I guess part of the film is kind of a fight with oblivion. So the it's oblivion is like a second death.
Yeah.
And in a way, I'm sort of, through those photographs of these anonymous people who are all probably dead, you know, they're old pictures that some of them were there in that bag. Some I found later. It's like once you start looking on the pavement, you start finding things, you know. And I found a lot of pictures. Some I actually bought in a, you know, in a market in Parque Rivadavia, where they sell old books and stamps and coins and so on. But then I asked one of the people, one of the guys who was selling these things, that where they get them from, and it's actually the cartoneros. I don't think, I don't know if you have a word for this. It's the people who pick up stuff from the garbage cans and then try to resell them, especially if it's paper or carton or you know, anything that is recyclable. They take them to places where they get a few pesos for that. And some have realized that maybe in some of these, like you know, I'm forgetting the word for mercado de pulgas, the flea
Flea market.
markets.
Yeah.
Yeah, the flea markets. There's some idiots who will actually pay for this junk, and so, but it's all of it. What you get in the flea markets is, at least here in Buenos Aires, it comes from the junk, from, you know, garbage. So somehow that all resounded, and I realized that something, there was a connection. These photographs, just like the letters actually that my father gave me, in a very different way, but somehow they came together, were a connection with the dead.
Hmm. Yes. It's really incredible how in the film you use a lot of elements that belong to someone else to talk about yourself.
Mm.
And what you were saying just now, I had this question about how do you what happened about the city, you know? And now when you were telling all this, I understand that you also grab elements from the people from Buenos Aires and all their different stories. And the other interesting element are the actors.
Well, the letters had to be read, so I thought of reading them myself, and it didn't make sense. And then I wanted to read the letter that I read at the end, where which I wrote to my father when my mother died. But I needed to give voice to these letters, and not just voice, but physical presence, in a way, to make incarnate the people behind these letters for the audience, and also for myself, you know. And it was funny because Denise Groisman and Julian Larquier, who are the actors. Denise was actually a former student of mine. So I don't usually work with actors, so I thought I felt kind of a certain familiarity with this former student, that I wouldn't feel just calling on an actor, sort of a professional actor. And she called Julian, who happened to be her boyfriend. So they were a young couple who were very unlike my parents in many ways. And when they started reading the letters that I gave them edited down versions of the letters, I made an effort to, because the letters, I mean, there were lots and they were very long and complex. And also a lot of the context was missing. So it was hard to understand. But they basically, for them, it was like the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, it was from another, it was like a meteorite from another planet. They just basically didn't understand half of what was going on in the letters. And it took a while, you know, they read them and and I tried to register this process as they read the letters, first not quite understanding, and ultimately getting something for themselves. And I think this is encapsulated in that scene towards the end of the film where they're kind of just out of, I don't know what, boredom, they're starting to improvise. One of them was singing, Julian, who's a singer in a band, and he started to sort of improvise a song. And I said, why don't we do this? You know, why don't you just forget about leave the letters aside, just what stayed in your mind, and make, you know, do a kind of rap or trap about that. And so they started improvising, and it was just amazing. I had almost tears rolling down my cheeks because I felt now they've understood the letters. They're using them to talk to each other.
Okay, we have a question from Johanna. As our world becomes increasingly digital, it occurs to me that you dive into your parents' history will be harder for my children to do for me. Do you think our relationship toward our family past is changing in the digital age?
Wow, yes, that's a very good question in the sense that I don't have an answer. It's yeah, it's kind of worrying in a way that what will, I mean, this moment that we're going through, it's actually possibly being recorded, and yet nobody will ever look at this again, and it will probably be lost in some digital archive, for accessible for a few years, and then in a few years time technology will have changed, and it will be like a floppy disk, you know, where we thought, I as an old person, we thought we would keep stuff, you know, archived in a floppy disk, which you know, was not the case. So that's at the same time, there's so much recording and taking of pictures going on, you know, and videos, and it's so confusing because we're living through, I think no generation before us has ever been so much, you know, in recorded and taken pictures, videos, whatever, Facebook, Instagram, and but you know what will remain? That's a huge and troubling question.
Hmm. So, Jared, you want to speak?
Yeah. Thanks for joining us tonight, Andres. You and I actually did meet in person once when you presented your film on Ricardo Piglia at the Harvard Film Archive, and we had dinner with Hayden, get
Yes.
together. So
Hello.
yes, it's, but then you were about 2 hours south of White River Junction. So now you know, if you just keep going north on that interstate and at some point make a little left turn, you get to White River. So you are close, and so hopefully at some point we can actually really bring you here. But since you were talking about the two actors, the other presence in that film is Edgardo Kozarinsky, who is a filmmaker in his own right, but also a novelist and essayist, and but he's not identified. in your film by name, not until the credits. So obviously viewers in Argentina would recognize him, especially if they, watch films and read books, but an international audience might not. And I'm wondering what relation was his to the rest of the other people that figure in your film, particularly the actors, because he also starts reading some of the letters, but he also assumes some kind of other role, and I'm curious to hear more about that.
Well, it's nice to see you, Gerd, and that's a very good question. I'm happy you asked, because Edgardo Kosarinsky, who in a way plays the role of my father, was really instrumental in making this film happen for me, because he was actually one of the first persons that I mentioned or talked about the film with. And we had this incredible conversation one evening when you still kind of sit in story, my ideas, and the following morning when I woke up, I had an email with an attachment that had a script attached. Edgardo had written script for me for the film that we had talked about, which was just amazing. Edgardo Kosarinsky is now he's more of a writer. He considers himself a writer, basically, and he is one of the most important living writers in Argentina, no doubt. And but he is also a very important filmmaker and very influential in my life. He made one film many years ago, probably 1978 or 1980, that was called One Man's War, based on the diaries of Ernst Junger, who's a German writer who's also, as a military officer, part of the German occupation of Paris. And this film was based on Junger's diaries, wartime diaries during this occupation of Paris, and combined with newsreels from the time, French newsreels, which of course were absolutely Nazi in content or direction. And that film, when I saw it, it was just mind-blowing. And of course, it wasn't for Edgardo and for a spectator like myself. I did not know Edgardo at the time. It was clearly not about Paris under the occupation, but about Argentina under the military dictatorship, which was running strong at the time. So from that moment on, I later met Edgardo and we became friends. And it happened that he also was friends of my parents. So in a way, Edgardo's presence here was like a talisman. We say talisman, like a symbol, like something magical. His presence was. I mean, without him, the film would not have been made. And it was also a recognition of Edgardo in a way as a kind of artistic father, if you want, or mother. He hates that kind of talk. He prefers brother. And I think we are now. I have earned my brotherhood with Edgardo Kosarinsky. And his presence in the film is incredible, because when we were shooting, I asked him to read from my father's letter to me after my mother died. And I was listening in the studio where we recorded the readings, and suddenly there was my father. I mean, it was clearly Edgardo, and he has a very, very distinct face and a very distinct way of speaking. But really, I really felt that. It was just very confusing.
Yes, Desiree.
Hi, Andres. So
Hello.
nice to meet you, and thank you for being here and sharing your wonderful film with us all. I appreciated your film on so many levels, but one in particular, it really resonated with me on a personal level. Specifically, its intercultural dimensions, the relationship between your mother and your father, him being from Argentina, her being from India. My father was Mexican American, my mother is Anglo American, and they too had a very tempestuous relationship, mostly because their parents were constantly at each other's throats. And as I got older, I understood that that relationship was the product of larger forces of immigration patterns, social and economic mobility. You know, this kind of larger story, this larger narrative that I didn't understand when I was a child. And so I wonder if you could talk a bit about your intention with the film. Was it to tell the intimate story in order to get at this larger external narrative, or was it vice versa, sort of the larger narrative by way of the intimate story?
Yes, I'm happy to hear you, because ultimately the film is not about my parents, but about yours. I really do think, I mean, my story, my sort of autobiographical story with my parents' letters is a kind of mechanism for you to have these thoughts. Actually, if you think about it, I not only edited down the letters drastically. I mean, what's left is nothing, just a little piece of the letter. Even the letters were nothing related to the whole life. It just cover, you know, very scattered years among, I mean, and of course they don't tell each other. Very rarely do they tell each other's stories, because they're talking aside from these letters. So the letters, in a way, I realized were kind of tip of the iceberg, you know. What you see in the film is just a little fragment of the lives of my parents, which were beneath the waters, invisible to you. And there's the giant block of ice, which would be the iceberg. Is you have to imagine it out of that little piece that I offer you. And how do you do that? It's through your own associations, you know, your own emotions, your own story, your own ideas about your story. And I mean, that's really what the film is about. It's, I offer, you know, my pound of flesh, but it's really only in order for you to have these thoughts. And yeah, the wider story is of course very important, and it's kind of a feeling of vertigo to feel, you know, I felt this at one point in my life as well, you know, oh my God, that means I'm part of this whole movement of migrants that are changing the face of the world, and sometimes literally the faces that you see on the street. You know, I think it's best not to think too much about that. It's good to be aware that you're really tremendously connected to what's going on, but it can be disturbing. You lose a little individuality if you think too much about that, which is kind of paradoxical because these are supposed to be like first person films, but I think the first person is just a pretext.
Yeah, that was super interesting. Does anybody has any questions now, or should I continue with mine? Okay, so Nora?
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew you had a question.
I do. I was so struck by the beginning of your film, the way you held the photographs and walked, because it's a very innovative way to use stills in a documentary film. And, you know, I make documentaries too, but I'd never thought of doing that, of actually holding the photograph and walking. So I love that, and I wanted you to maybe talk about that and how that came to you. Is that something you've done in the past, or is that a new technique that you developed for this film?
Let's call it a technique. I really was very, once, you know, we found these photographs, and then we played these games with Lola, my daughter, trying to make up story, trying to first of all imagine what was the real story, and then we quickly gave up and just started inventing stories, which is reflected in our dialogue in the film. But to me, the photographs at the beginning are not just images. They're actually objects. And part of the story that they're telling is that they're objects that have been around, you know, and that miraculously came into my hands. And I'm kind of feeling a great deal of respect for that moment that they came into my hands for a moment. And what am I going to do with these objects, that the magical objects that represent lives, you know, and stories behind the lives, of course. But I really struggled. How do I convey in a cinematic manner the fact that they're objects, not just images? So I did a few experiments that some are still in the film, like I put them underwater. I did a few experiments. I burnt some. I don't know. I tried different things, and I was thinking very much of the contradiction or paradox of having still images in a movie. You know, it's this movement, and I thought, and the past and the present, and suddenly I came upon this idea of, what if I move them around? So I you know, I tried it out with my cell phone, and actually with the camera it was much harder because of the focus. And then finally we got it somehow right. And I like the way that the city appeared in an indirect way. But here in Buenos Aires, many spectators have written to me saying, oh, this is in such and such a place. And this is, you know, they're like identifying what's going on behind the pictures. And also the fact that these photographs came from the street, and it's like they're going back to the street, you know. I don't know. Those are some of the ideas. Basically give them movement and preserve their nature as objects, with a story as objects of their own.
Thank you.
In some interviews, you also talk about the difference between a photograph and a digital image for the materiality, and that is such an interesting concept too.
Yeah, I think that that's something that was alluded to in the earlier question, you know, about what will happen to memories once the physical nature of photographs as objects has disappeared, and letters too. And this is something that Edgardo Kosarinsky talks about in the conversation that we had. You know, that there's something that you can touch, and the fact that I can see my mother's actual handwriting is a very direct physical connection to her. That yeah, in the digital it's something else. I don't want to sound like, oh, you know, in the good old days we wrote letters and beer was cheap. So I think there are different ways that are happening now that it's maybe hard to grasp.
Mhm.
But certainly the object has a story, you know, and the object is a very cinematic thing. That there's, you can talk about you know, the biography of a photograph as an object, especially old photographs, the scratches, the fact that they're found in the garbage, the even the technique of these amateur photographs, most of them. So I think there's something a bit fetishistic about this care for old photographs, which.
Does anybody have another question now, or I can continue with another one? So I would love to hear about how was the editing process, because there's something that you always say, that in the documentary, doing the film happens when you do the montage, the editing, and in a fiction, you do it in the script stage. So what did you find when you started editing? What was that?
Well,
did it change a
yeah,
lot?
this is in a way a kind of massive generalization, but yeah, the if there's a difference between fiction and documentary, is that in the documentary you write the script after you shot the film, and you write it basically in the editing room, which is interesting because each shoot, the experience of shooting a film is always different and unique. And so in a way that favors a more unique result in a documentary approach, rather than, you know, just everything comes out of my head in traditional fiction. But, you know, not many people have realized that this is a fiction film. It's true. It's amazing. Nobody, I mean, only one person has realized this is a fiction film. One friend of mine said, yeah, this is your first fiction film. And I tried to sort of allude to the fact in the title, but it seems the fact that I'm a documentary filmmaker kind of just I don't know. It's everybody thinks it's a documentary, so I'm fine. I love documentary.
And why do you think it's a fiction?
Well, because it's called private fiction. No, because I mean, there's actors. They're reading. They're not. It's not. You know, there's some improvisation, of course, all the time. But in fiction, there's improvisation, and it's a true story. But so many fiction films are true stories.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe it's. I like the fact that it's not clear what it is. You know, I do like that, and in a way, the title is a kind of provocation, because yeah, it's kind of between documentary and fiction. You know, what is it? And I myself am interested in films where I think, you know, what is this?
Yeah. Jared? Hi, Liz.
Hola,
Hi.
Laura. It was actually me in the background that was actually going to ask a question about where did your question come from about did your parents love each other?
Mm.
Because that was something that Gad and I talked about later, and we thought, you know, neither one of us would have asked that question about our parents if they loved each other. Somehow it, you know, it surprised us that you arrived at that. That you arrived at that question. And the second comment that I had is the whole, and this connects more to Laura's question before, was the whole time that I was looking at your film, I was thinking of Marcelo Brodsky's work.
Mm.
And how he intervenes photographs. And I thought you were doing the same thing, but in a filmic, not the same thing, but a similar thing in a filmic medium, right? And he's doing it in photography, and then the transposition to the digital and the photograph in the news and how it circulates. So yeah, so a comment and a question.
So going first with the last, the reference to Marcelo Brodsky's work, which I know quite well. I'm a friend of Marcelo's. Marcelo Brodsky started, I think, kind of discovered his relationship to photography when he started doodling on a photograph of his class at school, at you know, high school, his graduating class. And he started making little notes on the photograph, saying what had happened to this one, what had happened to this other one. And his generation was completely decimated by the military dictatorship, especially at that school, the Colegio Nacional de Buenos Aires, which is a very kind of special, it's a state school, but it's very kind of elite. And a lot of like former presidents have come out of that. And writers, and then he realized that what was interesting about a photograph was our relationship to it, and what you know, what you don't know. That was also an interesting discovery by Marcelo Brodsky, that he didn't know the story of some of his classmates, and so he actually wrote this. I don't know what happened to him. Marcelo has continued working in many ways. One of his, I think, last books is amazing. He compiled photographs of like street demonstrations and stuff from 1968, you know, the year of rebellion. And he intervenes them in the same way, with sometimes painting, sometimes words. And I think I'm doing, yeah, that's a brilliant, actually, perception. I had never thought of it myself, you know, that it was related to that. In a way, what I'm trying to do is similar or analogous to what Marcelo Brodsky does with photography. I urge all of you to look out for his work, which is really quite special. And the other question is regarding whether my parents loved each other. Well, you had very happy childhoods, Heidi, and I don't know, Gert too. Yeah, I'm really envious. I guess, or I guess I don't know. Maybe alcohol covered up for everything. I don't know. But I was kind of witness to you know, fights, and it was a very stormy relationship, passionate, and my house was always full of people, and this brought conflict, and you know, I would step into my mother's room and she was with somebody who's not my father in the bed. And so it was, I mean, you know, the 1960s and 70s, I guess, were a bit like that for some people. And so I had legitimate doubts, you know. And it was really, as I think I said in that.
That's the question. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we had questions about our parents too, but I mean, I never asked them, and I think Sylvia did either. You know, it's
oh, nor did I. I never asked my father. I just kind of came to this conclusion privately when I heard him speak at my mother's funeral, and he completely, you know, he was torn apart, and he brought these very precise memories of moments of utter happiness that I realized, wow, they really must have loved each other, and all the things they had to go through, you know, rejection, and so. But I didn't tell him. I'm telling him now, actually, through the film. Are you listening, Papa?
Samantha, did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to ask what's at stake for you in trying to find the answer to that question.
This is what you get for mentioning Freud in a film, you know. Never do that again. Note to myself. What's at stake? I don't know. I mean, when you're making a film, you're just trying to make it as honest and as resonant and as you know, try to lie the least to yourself that you possibly can, because it's a film, and that's what a film demands. You know, you have to put to the side my concerns about myself in a way, and just do as the film asks. And the film demands exposing yourself, and I don't know what's at stake. I mean, it was hard. That's what I was saying. You know, it's harder for me, at least, to make this kind of film rather than a film where I may actually, you know, a documentary. You run a risk of you're trying to film some guerrilla or a very difficult situation. But it seems this is easy. Talk about your parents. It's actually quite the opposite, I feel. So, I mean, I felt, and I think I tried to say it in the film, I don't know what I'm doing. And actually, I'm not sure if what I'm doing is right. This is true. I really did feel this. And now I mean, I don't know. I just, at least I finished the film somehow. So.
I was just going to ask you about that, about the phrase. I don't know if what I'm doing is right, and how you felt now after finishing the film, because like the morality. When I did the documentary about the death of my father, that happened to me a lot. Like, what is he thinking? It's okay what I'm doing. Will he like this? And
well, you'll never know. But I actually now feel that I mean, the film has been going around for some time now. It's had a lot of resonance everywhere. So in a way, I feel that justifies the film. That I mean, this sounds like a kind of hackneyed thing to say, but you really, at least in my case, you start to understand the film that you've made once you start talking about, or rather hearing what people have to say about it, or what happened to them when they were watching it. I mean, if you make a film, I don't know if any of you there are filmmakers, it's you never get to see the film because you made it. I mean, you can see pieces and you're trying to achieve certain effects, but you can't know yourself firsthand whether, because it's like you can't be, you know, have your cake and eat it or whatever. It's like you can't see the film as a film. You're seeing it as a construction that you made. You can only see it as a film through others, or sort of guess the film through what people say, or sometimes even just through the sort of vibes that people convey. It's quite strange. This is what I miss about you know, being in the cinema, is that fortunately I had the opportunity to, the film began its life, you know, festival life, at least with when there were screenings in theaters, but but you walk into a theater and you sort of feel what's happening. Is this true? Is this a complete imagination? I don't know, but it feels different in many ways. In many days, it's just different. It's like if you're in a room and somebody, say you're in a waiting room in a doctor's or something, and somebody starts crying, you're affected by that. It's impossible not to be. You have to have, I don't know, nerves of steel. And in a way, in the cinema, in the theater, I think there's something of the same going on. So you do perceive what's going on. Obviously, when people laugh or when people cry loudly, people don't usually cry loudly. There is an intuition of the film that you have made. But I think I have gotten used to this idea that you'll never know. That's why you go on to make another film.
Wow, I'm so happy that we are recording this. Does anybody have any 1 or 2 more questions? I know it's late. It's 10 p.m. in Buenos Aires. So
It's
I don't know
10.
if you have dinner, Andres, but
It's early in Buenos Aires.
It's early.
No, not anymore. You know, like people go out at midnight in Buenos Aires. That the old people like me, let alone people like Laura.
Yeah, I missed that.
That's not happening now, so don't worry.
Yeah, I'm lucky. Okay. More questions? All right. So thank you so much, Andres. This was incredible.
I'm very happy to have lived this moment. That's I really appreciate all the comments and questions, which make me kind of, you know, the film comes alive again for me, which is wonderful. So I really do miss the fact that we're not going out for a beer now, but well.
In the future, I have the. I know that someday you are going to come and visit here.
Well, possibly. I think next year I will be in Boston. So
it's the beautiful autumn of all the world. You have to come here in autumn.
I know. I imagine. Yes, I will. I promise.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, for the invitation, and thank you all for this lovely conversation.
Thank you so much. Okay, have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Andres.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Buddy, thanks so much.